Okay, y'all, let's talk about the system today. I typically do not talk about what's happening at the ecosystem level, but because there's been so much chatter about legislation to protect college sports, universities saying they're running out of money, people saying there's unlimited resources, pay. Let's talk about what's really going on at the ecosystem level. So, the question I have is, can the system as it is currently architected sustain itself? Okay, now if you recall a few weeks back, I talked about University of Louisville, who shouted the alarm. It's like, look, what's happening in D1 sports right now is not sustainable as it's currently architected, and we got to do something different. And they set forth plenty of facts supporting the proposition that it was not sustainable and proposed some solutions about what could be done. Okay, now there are two very different competing sets of thoughts in the culture about what's happening with college sports. One of them is that the resources are finite and these athletes, they ruin college sports by making all this money. And we ain't got money to keep paying all these people. That's one school of thought. There's another school of thought that says athletic programs want to keep being the man and they want to keep making money off the athletes and not paying them a dime for it. And therefore, they should continue to pay and pay and pay. They being the athletic programs, okay? And that notion of continue to pay and pay and pay and pay comes from the perspective of the thinking that athletic programs have unlimited funds available to them and that they should spend all those funds on football and basketball since those are revenue generating sports and damn everybody else. Now, the truth sits somewhere in the middle of all that, okay? But we need to talk about just a couple facts. So certainly athletic programs have been deficit spending for some time now. And if you've been listening to me for a while, every now and then I will come and tell you all the athletic programs that are running deficits or have significant debt loads. Part of that is associated with the arms race for facilities, upgrading stadiums, building new football facilities, building basketball facilities, all facilities, right? So there's a lot of that. And then there's a lot of just the increased expense of supporting athletics, including a new $20.5 million line item for Rev Share. So programs have been running deficits, okay? University of Louisville, just told you out loud, in fiscal year 25, they ran a $12.5 million deficit. They told you their reserves had gone from 34 million to 3.4 million. And the reporting this year, or in the last couple of weeks, has been that they're going to run a $30 million deficit in fiscal year 27 in athletics. Okay, so they aren't the only ones. Athletic programs have been running deficits for a while. Secondly, it's also true that athletics programs provide significant value and the university ecosystem cannot survive without successful athletics programs because that supports enrollment, philanthropy, partnerships, and reputation. So you can't just cut off funding athletics, okay? We had the whole discussion about it wasn't sufficiently nuanced to say it's an expense problem. Not sufficiently nuanced, okay? And because the region where these major universities sit need the jobs, the businesses, and the economic activities that major universities provide. So all those things are true. What's also true is that there's a demographic shift and issues in the political landscape that are creating uneven enrollment challenges. And so you may have heard that Syracuse University is going to miss its enrollment targets for this coming school year by a significant amount. Okay. Now, there's nothing wrong with the University of Syracuse University. Fine university. They are not the only school that is missing enrollment targets significantly. Why is that? Two reasons. First reason, the enrollment cliff. So, college-age students were born back in around 2008. 2008, remember the economic crisis? Depending on how old you are. Remember the financial crisis? Real estate, all of that? Okay. People lost jobs. People stopped having babies. And they stopped having a lot of babies, roughly 15% decline in the births coming out of the economic crisis in the late 2000s, in the aughts. Okay, so fewer students in the ecosystem. And that means that there are the same number of universities fighting for a fewer number of students. And students are dollars in tuition and fees dollars. So that's the first thing that's happening, just fewer students. Putting more pressure on students is the political landscape that we now have a culture where international students who typically pay full freight, okay, are not being admitted, not being granted visas to come to universities here. So they can get admitted, but they can't get visas. And if you can't get a visa, you can't come to school. And many of those international students were paying full freight tuition and fees. And so now you've got and that dip has been significant. 15 to 20% are the estimates of how many fewer international students, both undergraduate and graduate, are no longer coming to universities in the US because of the political landscape. So you have those two things that are affecting the top line revenue numbers. Okay, how much money can we generate off of tuition and fees when you have enrollment cliffs, so there are just fewer students out there here in the US, and the preference to no longer admit or to admit far fewer international students when those folks pay full freight. Okay, and so universities outside of athletics, okay, are also experiencing significant deficits, okay, including one clear example is University of Oregon is going to be running a 30 million deficit at the university level, not the athletics level, right? University budget up here, athletics is a department or a line item here, right? Everything rolls up to university level. So at the university level, the university is running a deficit, and they're projecting perhaps up to a $50 million deficit in the coming years at the top line, University of Oregon, okay? Fewer students, fewer tuition dollars, something has to give. So what gives? Academic programs get cut. Student services get cut. Tuition goes up. Admission to athletic events goes up. Non-revenue generating sports get cut. Because ultimately you got to balance a budget. And then while all that's happening, on the revenue side, you've got schools like Ohio State saying they're going to be the first school to have a $500 million athletics budget. $500 million in the coming years. Now, I think they're roughly half, maybe a little more than half that now, but they can clearly see a way to a $500 million budget. Now, to add on to that, Open Doors co-founder Blake Lawrence, in the last few weeks, he presented to the NIL Forum membership, and he indicated, and as you know, Open Doors processes more NIL deals than anyone else in the market. And Mr. Lawrence has indicated by 2030, college athletes will earn 5.1 billion with a B in total compensation across all athletics. Today, it's roughly 3.5 billion. So in less than 4 years, a 35% increase in compensation to athletes. Now, athletic departments are struggling now. Universities are struggling now, and they're indicating that there's going to be a 35% increase in expense associated with college athletics. Okay, so universities and athletic departments are going to be under extreme pressure in the coming years. My question is, can the ecosystem hold up? Okay, so above the cap dollars for athletic departments are going to be crucial. They're going to need to find NIL that is not associated with the university and the Rev Share, not associated with collectives, just above the cap, true NIL, because there is no limit on how much athletes can be compensated with true NIL dollars. Now, MMRs, those multimedia rights entities, they've been held to be the same as collectives, and so they will be subject to to stricter scrutiny coming through this, the CSC. Okay, so the athletic departments are going to have to restructure their staff, restructure their operations, and rethink their revenue streams. What does all this mean? Okay, it means, so there are three realities we need to talk about. Student enrollment will remain under pressure. Universities are going to have less top-line revenue to work with, and that's going to affect the entire academy because we keep forgetting, and we can't forget, college athletics sits within the structure of college, of higher education. You cannot have college athletics if you don't have colleges, okay? So student enrollment is going to continue to be under pressure. That's going to keep top-line revenue with universities under pressure. It's going to affect the entire academy, okay? Athletic departments are going to, who traditionally have been net positive to the revenue line, okay, are now becoming net negative. So they are taking more money than they are giving to the overall revenue of the university, okay? So programs are going to get cut, okay? And if we take University of Louisville at its word around the importance of athletics to continue to grow the university ecosystem, and there's a huge consequence if they don't do that, you will continue to see investments in athletics, okay? Particularly football and baseball. And according to Open Doors, athletes will continue to grow their share of the pie. So, a couple things are going to happen. Many D1 institutions are going to have to rethink their core academic mission because they just cannot entertain all the expense to run the university, including the increased expense of athletics, without creating some deduction someplace else. There's only it's pie, right? You can only allocate the dollars that you have unless you can figure out how to grow the pie. And the one way you grow the pie is that you cut expenses. So there will be, and so unless something else changes, many institutions that are going to have to rethink the academic curriculum, even though they are in the business of higher ed. Okay, not solely because of what's happening in athletics, but certainly athletics is putting significant pressure on the academy as a whole. And true enough, some schools simply are not going to survive. The enrollment cliff is going to take some people off, take some universities out. It's going, the limitation on international student visas combined with the enrollment cliff is going to take certain schools out. It simply will not be enough money to remain as a going concern. So some schools will cease to operate. And on the athletic department front, okay, they're going to need to find two things: additional sources of philanthropy to support the operational expense of athletics, and true above the cap NIL to fund that $5.1 billion that's coming. Okay? And the other thing that athletic departments are going to need to do, and universities as well, manage coaching expenses. Because we have all this conversation, and we don't even talk about the coaches. Coaches cost universities in excess of $270 million last year in buyout expenses. That's not their salaries. That's when you just pay them to sit on the couch and do nothing. Okay? And that too, the salaries and the buyout, the overall compensation for coaches, are clearly having an impact on the overall bottom line of universities' athletic departments. So, can the ecosystem survive as currently architected? I think it cannot. Certain things are going to have to change. Maybe legislation can help. Maybe additional above the cap dollars are going to help. Some programs are going to cease to exist. There's going to be a lot of change in higher ed, including in athletics, on a go-forward basis. Anyway, that's my talk about what's happening from a governance perspective and how athletics fits into it. As always, let me know what you think.